Elm Street Church was a very wonderful place, the Barn Church we called it, because it was a place where there was no pressure of any sort on me. The people there loved me. The people there were supportive. We loved each other. I was free from any kind of pressure from anybody about what I taught or believed or any of that. And it was in that situation that an Australian theologian by the name of Robert Brinsmead, a former Seventh-day Adventist man, contacted me one day and said, I wonder if you'd be interested in a research project. And I said, what's the deal? And he said, I'm a former Seventh-day Adventist. I have rejected just about all the distinctive Adventist doctrines. The only one I haven't yet studied again for myself thoroughly is the doctrine of hell. And he said, I'm looking for somebody outside the Adventist movement who comes from a traditional background on the hell teaching, who has scholarly credentials, who will do a year-long research project for me and tell me what I'm supposed to believe on this. And I said, I'll pay for it. I said, how much do you want to pay? And he said, $3,000. Well, that sounded like a fortune for sure for a year's work. So I said, okay, I'd love to do it. I'd love to study anyway. So I started this project. I would work at Decatur Printing Company during the day all week. On Fridays, we'd drive to Franklin, Tennessee, and I'd let my wife and little children off at my in-laws' house. And I would drive into Nashville to Vanderbilt Divinity Library, feverishly Xerox pages out of books and journals and articles till closing time. Go back the next morning, do the same thing all day Saturday. Go home and convert that stuff to note cards the next week at night after I got off my print shop job. And then go back the next weekend, do the same thing at Vanderbilt. And I was probably working about 40 hours a week on that research project plus my regular job for about 9 months. And during the course of that time, I researched this subject of hell in the way I described earlier. At that point, I began to say to myself, wait a minute, everything I'm finding in the Bible doesn't teach what I always thought the Bible taught. It looks to me like the Bible is overwhelmingly clear that the wicked will not be kept alive forever to be tortured forever, but they will be extinguished, they will be punished, they'll suffer whatever they need to suffer, but they finally will be dead, gone, destroyed, no more, can't find them, all of that, which we'll be talking about tomorrow. So I contacted Brinsmead, who sponsored the research, and said, hey, I'm finding this stuff is surprising what I'm learning here. Do you mind if I write a book? And I'm thinking to myself, on one day I'm thinking, I've got to write a book. This is too good to keep to yourself. Then the next day I'm thinking to myself, you can't write a book. You'll get shot and ridden out of town on a rail if you say this in a book. Then I'd think the next day, well, you got to say it because that's what the Bible says. And if this is wrong, somebody needs to do a better job than they ever have so far of showing why it's wrong. So I finally decided that's what I should do is write it. So Brinsmead says, yes, you can write a book on 2 conditions. One, I want you to, I forgot what the first one was, but the second one was ask this British New Testament scholar named F.F. Bruce if he would write a foreword to it. So I did, and he did. And Brinsmead published The Fire That Consumes in 1982. In 5 months, he sold out his printing. He contacted me just as we moved to Houston, Texas, which I had to come back and tell a little bit about that in just a second here, and said, I don't want to be a book publisher anymore. I'll give you your book. The condition is that you maintain it in as good a quality printing as I've done, and so forth. And so I went to the elders of the church where we had recently joined and said, I'm not asking for money, I'm asking for ideas. I need $10,000 to reprint this book. Does anybody have any ideas how I can get it? 2 of the elders said, we don't know if we agree with you or not, but we believe in Christian scholarship, and we'll co-sign a note at the bank for you. So I borrowed $10,000 from the bank, reprinted the book. It just happened at that time that the man who was editor of Evangelical Book Club had graduated just a year or 2 before from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Chicago, and it just happened that he believed in conditional immortality. So when this book came out, he said, I'd like to use this as a selection of Evangelical Book Club. So he did, and that put it in the hands of hundreds and maybe thousands of professors and scholars all over the English-speaking world, as well as a lot of studious laymen. And then the book just went from there. The Fire That Consumes has probably been through 5 or 6 printings in the hardback book. A British edition was brought out, which is sold out through several printings. And a book called Two Views of Hell, which is a spin-off, was published by InterVarsity Press, which I learned the other day has just come out in either 7th or 9th printing. I'm not sure which on that. But The Fire That Consumes is now being cited and discussed and footnoted in theology books and Bible dictionaries and all kinds of books all over the English-speaking world as well. All of which goes to show we got a big God, and He can take a little David with a little rock and knock down a big giant. And it's just wonderful to see what He does and be surprised by it. Well, I got to get us to Houston here because our time's running out tonight, and I'm still in Alabama. About 1981, I began to feverishly search for some other job. God graciously guided during these years in many wonderful ways. I'm just going to tell 2 or 3 quick stories here. One time with a revelation from a Bible verse. During these years in the 1970s in the Barn Church, I was personally struggling with 2 doctrinal issues. What is the relationship between grace and faith and baptism and works, and how does all that fit together? I was also struggling with spiritual gifts, which was not a part of my traditional upbringing of the more phenomenal sort. And I was believing those things were for real, but I wasn't quite sure how to understand all that. And I wanted to understand that. So one Sunday I told my wife, I don't know how to explain this, but I've got to go in the woods today at a state park and fast and pray until I get some answers from God. And I went to the state park and carried my Bible with me. And I began to pray and prayed for about an hour every way that I knew how, standing up, sitting down, lying flat on the ground, shouting, whispering, crying, just every way I knew, and saying, God, please give me some answers. I'm not going to eat till I know the answer to these problems. You've got to tell me. And I'm thinking, maybe He'll speak in a voice. Maybe He'll send somebody through here with an answer. Maybe a bird will fly through and drop a piece of paper out of his mouth with it written on it. Who knows what will happen, but I've got to get an answer. And I kept praying and praying and praying. And then I began to read my Bible. And I let it fall open, and it fell open in the middle. That's called the spiritual law of gravity. And I started reading in the Psalms. And I read a number of Psalms before anything particularly stood out. But then all of a sudden I came to Psalm 115, verse 3, and it was like that verse just jumped off the page and knocked me in the head. It says, our God is in the heavens, and He does whatever He wishes. And I just knew it deep inside, this is the answer to everything. Who's saved? God saves who He wants to. Who has spiritual gifts? Whoever God wants to give them to. What gifts does He give? Whatever He wants to give. Our God is in the heavens. He does what He wishes. That's where it belongs. That's the answer. I didn't really understand how all that answered everything at first, but I knew it was the answer. One morning on the way to work, I was driving a car that looked just like the one in that picture. It's a little Opel GT. For those of you who don't know about it, that's a poor man's Corvette. But I loved that little car, and I was driving to work one morning, and I was praying, and I began to tell the Lord why I ought to have a better job. And I concluded going over my resume with God, and I said to the Lord, where has all this gotten me? And immediately I heard a voice in my head, wasn't out loud, but it's clear words. It said, you've got the question wrong. It's not where has this gotten you, it's have you been faithful with what you've been given. And I said, yep, sorry, Lord. But that was a very important event that had an impact on my life. Next slide. As I searched around the country for a job, in the course of time, I was looking at Christianity Today one time and saw an ad for a company called InterChristo. And basically what they do is find people to work for Christian organizations. So I sent in a resume to them. They sent me a list of possible jobs I might be interested in. One of them said, seeking a founding editor for an interdenominational Christian newspaper in Houston, Texas. Address inquiries to J. Michael Cabinets, P.O. Box something or other, Houston, Texas. So I said to my wife, you got any interest in moving to Houston? She said, nope. Her daddy had come down to our house in Alabama and planted the yard full of nice things. Her mama lived 80 miles away. We had little children that could go see their grandparents. We were in both our hometowns nearby. Who wants to go to Houston? I still don't know why people want to go to Houston, although I kind of love it now after 26 years. But anyway, so I sent a resume to the guys in Houston. Then they called me on the phone and say, We want to fly you out here and interview you. So we did that. Then they said, you go home to the print shop and pray about it. We'll pray about it and see what we think the Lord is telling us. And the paper didn't exist at this time. That was going to be my first job, to create it out of nothing. So I went back to Alabama, and one day I said to my wife, one night I said to my wife, I don't know how to explain this, but I have a feeling they're going to call in the next day or two and offer me the job. Are you willing to go? And she said, of course, if that's what you need to do, we'll do it, but I hate to leave my house here and all that.